Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of This is Revolution Podcast. I am your host, Jason Miles, and can anyone guess the picture of the band behind me? For whatever reason, my backdrop is working. What can I send? I don't even know what to send. If you know what this is, I will think of something to send you if you can guess what this is. But I hope everyone's having a great day. We are having a heat wave here throughout California, in the America side, here in the Mexico side. And I just found out that my cold ass house is perfect for a heat wave. If you haven't done it already, please hit like, please subscribe. Don't forget to hit the bell, as we are constantly adding new programming to the channel. And we're going to be more diligent about movie night. So if you have the means and you feel so inclined, become a patron. You get access to all the after hours. You get to have access to all the call-ins. Like tonight is going to be a call-in after hours segment. What else do you get? Depending on the tier, you get merchandise. It is a great opportunity to support independent media. That being said, let me bring in my homie, my dog. He is the man of the Mau Mau Hour. He is the Pascal Robert.
Peace and greetings to the chat. Peace and greetings to the audience. Peace and greetings, Jason Miles. And they say New York City.
Someone asked that black flag behind me. Nope. Much younger band.
It looks like inside of CBGB, actually.
No, I want to say it's a club in the South, in Georgia. I want to say it's in Georgia. I vaguely remember those ceilings. I'm excited for tonight. We get to go down memory lane with you, but we have some announcements to make. Pascal tomorrow will be on the Majority Report.
I will be on the Majority Report tomorrow at noon, in the noon hour. Guys, talking about various political phenomenon. I think they want me to talk about Eric Adams as well as Ketanji Brown Jackson and a few other things.
Botch is a great guess. You are so close with Botch. Similar genre, different region of the country, but that is very close. Not the band behind me. Also, we want to send out get well soon to our comrade, Derek Varn.
Shout out to Derek Varn. Keep in your thoughts and your energy to the higher power for those who believe in the higher power. Varn had to have some emergency surgery. Hopefully he's doing well. So let's keep Varn in our thoughts, man.
Dillinger Escape Plan is but you guys are really getting close to the genre. And it's not REM, and it's not Dillinger Escape Plan. Varn is going to have some hopefully minor surgery. So again, shout out to Derek Varn. And we have to send out a big fat happy birthday shout to Ben Burgess.
A word?
Ben Burgess' birthday is today. We will not say how old he is, but he is not a spring chicken. So Pascal, today we're going to talk about New York City.
And they say New York City.
Are you excited about this?
Absolutely not. I have no idea how this is going to go.
I do want to say this before we even get started with the show. Deep State Kuba couldn't make the regular news show that we do. And I had an idea to do something a little different because for the last, I would say about month or so, Pascal and I kind of off and on have been having these conversations about New York in the 80s and 90s. And originally, one of the video essays, I think I want to say the Cosby one, was going to have a lot more New York footage in it, and I ended up pulling a lot of that out. And I was like, let's use this as an opportunity to talk about some of the stuff that Pascal talks about when we're not on air. And someone says, is this entire episode meant to be a meta trigger of Pascal? Not necessarily. It actually is a romp down a bit of memory lane for him. But let's keep in mind his time in New York, the 70s and 80s were, it was a very different New York in this time.
No doubt. No doubt.
And Pascal sent me this quote that I want to read to you guys. In September 1977, Mayor Ed Koch, a congressman and lawyer, won the Democratic primary over law professor Mario Cuomo, later governor of New York State, in a tough election fight. In 1977, New York City was a one-party town. There was no credible Republican challenger in the general election. Mayor Koch promised that this would be an administration that would face reality, and he assured voters that he would support the highest physical integrity. Mayor Koch, elected 3 4-year terms from 78 to 90, was committed in his first term to regain access to the public credit markets by presenting balanced and carefully crafted budgets after the ravages of the 1975 fiscal crisis. He returned the city to fiscally conservative policies dramatically different from the pre-fiscal crisis days. Mayor Koch maintained that redistributive functions were best left to the national government. He acted with the chutzpah appreciated by New Yorkers when taking on the unions in 1980 and winning, quote unquote, in a citywide transit strike. He was also contentious and pugnacious, quick to disagree with others, and aggressive in defending his positions. Within the first year, he alienated a large portion of African American voters by insisting on closing Sydenham Hospital in Harlem over widespread protests. A year later, he kept open the public health hospital on Staten Island, a borough dominated by the white working class. He further alienated progressive voters and African Americans by implementing harsh policies on welfare benefits in the city's social services agency, the Human Resources Administration. He supported his commissioner, Blanche Bernstein, who implemented policies to curb fraud in welfare payments by closing cases if notices were ignored and requiring face-to-face recertification meetings. His best friend, law partner, and corporation counsel, Alan Schwartz, described a major meeting between Mayor Koch and the African American leadership when Mayor Koch was abrasive and confrontational with his audience. I was stunned. Ed Koch was setting a tone that would create problems for him in the future. Deputy Mayor Basil Patterson, the highest ranking African American in the Koch administration, was so upset that he walked out of the meeting. The alienation and anger of African Americans who constituted 25% of the mayor's population grew throughout his administration. That is from Follow the Money, Who Controls New York City Mayors by Lynn Weikart. Pascal, you sent that to me today. And before we started the show, I went and watched again for maybe the 4th time a documentary about Yusuf Hawkins, who was murdered in Bensonhurst. Racial tensions were high. I was in New York in the early, I guess mid 80s. I think I went to New York in 86 when Times Square was still gross. And before he was elected mayor, David Dinkins referred to New York City not as a melting pot, but a mosaic. As someone who was born and raised in the city, what say you to Dinkins' description of the mosaic?
I think if the mosaic was painted in blood, that would be a very good apt description of New York City. I'm going to be, I think people would come to this show expecting that I'm going to go into some kind of like waxing rhapsodic about the horrors and the racial horrors of New York City, how jacked up it was and how terrible it was. It's easy to do that, and I could do that. But I want to present a very balanced narrative of my experience in New York City. New York City is a huge city with a population of, some would say, between 8 to 9 million people. It has 5 boroughs. Boroughs are probably what you would call in another city towns. Now, for those of you who don't know, obviously, if you don't watch the show regularly, you know I was born in the late 60s and grew up in the 70s and 80s and 90s in New York. My parents were Haitian immigrants and moved to New York City in the mid to late 60s. Now, if you're not aware, in terms of the ethnic demographics of New York, even within the black communities, if you will, in New York City, it's one of those few cities where even among black folk, there's a significant amount of ethnic and cultural variation, which is not something you would get, say, from Chicago, Detroit, or maybe even Oakland or LA. In other words, you go to Oakland, you meet black folk, they're either from Mississippi or Arkansas, and their parents have been in Chicago for several years. You meet black folk from Detroit, somewhere in the South, in those areas. Black folk from Oakland, maybe their grandparents came from LA, but they are all generally African Americans whose ancestry can be traced to the South, many of them who came to the North or the West in various iterations of the Great Migration. What is interesting about New York City is that New York City is one of the few cities in the United States, maybe barring New Orleans,
Mm-hmm.
where, and maybe a few others, where there's a large presence of Afro Caribbeans, literally going back to the 19th century. All right. There are people coming from Jamaica and usually Barbados, but particularly Jamaica, coming to New York City even in the 19th century, early 20th century. If any of you are a fan of Ralph Ellison's book Invisible Man, which is one of my favorite fictional novels, when Ellison talks about Harlem during that period of time, he mentions the presence of the Caribbeans there. As a matter of fact, if you're familiar with left history, in New York City or in America overall, you'll realize that many of the vanguards of black left politics in the United States who came out of New York City were Caribbean. Cyril Briggs, Hubert Harrison, many of the members of the African Blood Brotherhood came out of the Caribbean as well. So New York City is a place where there is significant diversity in black cultural expression, more so than you'll get in more places in more major cities in the United States. So of course, the Great Migration, you have black folk coming from the South in the early 20th century, starting in 1915 after World War One, going on into the 50s, so on and so forth. Most of the African Americans, from my experience, that came into New York usually came from North Carolina and Virginia. Also, what I would tend to find is that many of them tended to be, depending on what time period, they tend to have some level of job skills and more proximate to the middle class, barring a few exceptions that came in the later periods of the Great Migration. So, that being said, one of the hallmarks I remember about New York is that it was very common to meet black folk whose parents were either Haitian, Jamaican, Trinidad, or African American from the South. And there was not any ethnic tension in New York within those communities. You didn't really find that in New York City, where there were tensions between various iterations of black ethnics. Now, of course, when you're going to school and you're in elementary school, you're getting teased, you're getting picked on for being Haitian, so on and so forth. I experienced that, yes, for sure. But it wasn't as bad as what some Haitian kids were going through in Miami, which was really like a nightmare, like physical assaults. It was like terrible. But yeah, there was some of that. Caribbean kids, African kids got picked up, and all of that picked on. That's true. But one of the reasons why I wanted to give balance to my narrative about growing up in New York as much as I really talk about, the racial horrors, is that I grew up in what, and this is going to sound strange coming from me, what was probably one of the most idyllic black communities in Queens, New York. I grew up in a town called Cambria Heights, which realistically, it was working class to somewhat middle class people. We had government workers, we had teachers, maybe occasionally you have a doctor or a corporate, like, human resources executive. But because there many of the people who were coming from the islands and the West Indies, as well as the African Americans in the community, were very well educated. Many of them had college degrees, and some had good government jobs. It had the working class nature of the town really had more of an upper middle class aura. And one of the reasons I mentioned that, there was a 2006 article. I think I sent that to you, Jason. Do you have that?
No, you
There's
didn't.
a 2006 article. I think I emailed it to you about my town, literally Cambria Heights. It came out that talked about how blacks in this neighborhood in Queens had a higher per capita income than whites in that particular time, and how uh, that was an anomaly for not only New York City but for the country. And one of the towns that they talked about was basically Cambria Heights, where I grew up. So yeah, black income surpasses whites in Queens. This is a New York Times article from 2006. I'm getting for you right now, so Jason can share it. And it was. I mean, again, I'm not trying to make it seem like it was some kind of like bougie upper middle class area, right? But within the context of Jamaica Queens, it was considered kind of like an upper middle class neighborhood, and it was very nice. A lot of kids there went to Catholic schools. There was a Catholic school that was very close to my house, Sacred Heart. A lot of Caribbean kids. There were, a lot of West Indian kids, a lot of African American kids. My father was a car mechanic. At one point, he owned a couple of repair shops. My mom was a registered nurse. Those are not traditionally, upper middle class jobs, but because of the time in which we lived, it was kind of like a middle class, kind of like, decent kind of like neighborhood in New York at that time. So growing up in the 70s, one of the things that I remember about New York City that was fascinating was that the musical diversity was amazing. And as much as I talk about how, black politics does this evolution in the 70s, right? Out of black power and into the black political class, and how that kind of means a kind of devolution of the movement period, and how we have this kind of hyper capitalized black popular culture that starts with soul. Besides the actual political ramifications of that, it was amazing growing up and witnessing African American culture in the 70s up until really the 80s. Yes, I grew up in a Haitian family. I am one of those kids who remembers waking up on Saturday morning and looking forward to watching Soul Train. Like, that was a big thing. I had several older cousins who were like 5, 6, 7 years of mine. Whenever I was at their house on Saturday, we would go and we would watch, Soul Train and be like, wow, like, and the dances and the music. We had WBLS, which was a black radio station that played amazing, R&B music, soul, and then we had disco. So one of my earliest memories growing up in New York City in the 70s was listening to all of this amazing music, which is still some of my favorite music to this day. It was really, really phenomenon, right? A phenomenon. And For those who don't know, in 1975, New York City went through a major economic crisis. The city was not doing very well in the 70s. It was kind of grimy, but still in those suburbs of Queens, it was nice, it was clean, it was pretty decent. I went to Catholic school, I went to Catholic elementary school, and it was a decent environment. So I was able to grow up in the 70s and up into the 80s and see positive images of black folk. And not just Caribbean folk, like black American folk. Like one of the women on my neighborhood, and by the way, she was a single mom. She had two daughters. She was a teacher. She graduated from Howard. She was in a black sorority. I knew people who were in these kind of organizations uh coming up. No, I did not go to public school. I went to Catholic elementary school. But you gotta say something. When I say Catholic school, I'm not talking about like Choate Hall Academy where you're paying like $50,000 a year to send your kid to school. Like a Catholic elementary school in the 70s to send a kid to is less than $1,000 a year. You know, it's like not that. When I went to Catholic high school in New York, it was definitely less than like 3-4 grand a year, for sure. One of the things, and for those of you who are not from cities like New York, Chicago, I think even in Oakland they have some like really good Catholic high schools. It's like,
Yeah. They're pretty good, but they're not academically to the level of like some of the Southern California schools. But yeah, Bishop
but
O'Dowd. Yeah.
one of the things about Catholic schools, and yes, we can talk about the Catholic Church and whatnot, is that it did provide a quality education for a lot of black kids, black American kids and Caribbean kids. And I was in Chicago, definitely a lot of black kids. Bruce Dixon went to Catholic school, who normally did not want to go to some of the more problematic public schools and got a very good education, oftentimes not too expensive, and some of them went on scholarship. So I know Bruce Dixon went to Catholic school. I know quite a few people went to Catholic schools in Chicago. So, as a matter of fact, Adolph Reed went to Catholic school in New Orleans. So they did provide a certain quality of education that you could benefit from and avoid some of the travails of the problematic New York City public school systems at that time. Uh, so that experience was something I witnessed musically that was amazing. Another thing that I got to witness growing up in New York when I did was the birth of hip hop music. And one of the reasons why that was particularly salient to me is that I had an older paternal cousin who in like 1979 started DJing. He was actually a hip hop DJ. So I remember when hip hop starts literally as music you hear in Hollis Park at various block parties where kids will bring out their sound systems and DJ, and you had to get eight track cassette tapes to listen to the music because there were no albums. There were no albums, and you would see cats breakdancing, pop locking, and all that stuff. And
So you're saying every day was Beat Street?
every day was not Beat Street. I'm not trying to say every day. I'm not saying every day was Beat Street. But at the same time, watching this music form develop, I did not have a boombox, but I knew cats who had boomboxes. My dad was kind of conservative. He was like, "Nah, I'm not letting you walk around with no radio on your arm." But there were cats around me who had boom boxes, and yes, we wore like the pinstripe Lee pants and the name belts, and the British Walkers and all of that early hip hop fashion. My cousin used to wear Gazelles, Kangos. All of that stuff was very much in fashion when I was growing up in the 80s. Video music box, yes, video music box was something that we used to see early on. So I'm going to this Catholic elementary school, which was kind of idyllic, which had a lot of Caribbean kids, a lot of Black American kids, a lot of Haitian kids in Queens. And I graduate out from elementary school, and I go to high school. And that's when things kind of become traumatic. Because don't forget, I'm growing up in this kind of very idyllic, middle class black neighborhood. I'm going to a Catholic school that is run by largely white nuns, but all the students are pretty much black kids. And then my freshman year of high school, I go to my high school, which was St. Francis Prep, which is also where Big Woes went to high school 20 years after me. St. Francis Prep,
Was.
St. Francis Prep, for those you don't know, was a very elite Catholic high school in New York. It was also a big football school. One of the most well-known alumni of my high school was Vince Lombardi. Vince Lombardi went to St. Francis
Jesus.
Prep.
We need a seal here and a seal there. Sorry.
Yeah, Vince Lombardi went to my high school. So, I was kind of nervous. And my best friend, one of my best friends from high school, was a guy named James, who went to elementary school with me. And he also went to St. Francis. Now, the way you applied to Catholic high schools in New York back in the days, that you took a test and you had to put like your three top choices, right? You only got three choices. So you take this test. I forget the name of the test. I took the choice, and the rank in which you put the schools may determine what school you get into. Because the rumor was that if you didn't put St. Francis Prep as your first choice, you wouldn't get in. So I made sure, I was like, all right, I'll put that on my first choice. My mom wanted me to go to an all boys Catholic school called, I think the name of the school was Malloy. I didn't want to go to an all boys high school. I was like, that's not happening. So I went to I took the test and I made the St. Francis Prep. And everyone was like, wow, that's a good school, so on and so forth. Now my cousins, I have one cousin who was my age, and his older brother, they were both with DJs, and they went to public high school in Queens. So it was kind of not really rough, but they were like, yo, man, be careful when you go to school. Everyone's like, oh, you go to that school? That's where the smart kids go. So I go to St. Francis Prep, and the first thing I noticed, I'm a freshman, I'm kind of like, a chubby kid and whatnot. I walk in and I'm seeing all of these guys, these white kids who are like giants. I'm like, these dudes look like they're 40 years old in high school. I was like, what the hell is going on? And they were like football players. These guys were like massive. We used to have guys who graduated from my high school who played for like the Raiders. I think it was Bill Pascal. Bill Pascal went to my high school.
He played for the Raiders, for Los Angeles Raiders. Yes, he did.
Bill Pascal went to St. Francis Prep. Yeah. So he went to my high school. So first thing I noticed was like, yo, all the kids here are white, and some of these motherfuckers are big, and I'm worried about getting my ass kicked up in this place. This is not so. I'm like, okay. Me and my boy James are like, oh my god. So I'm growing up in New York City, and this is the first time I'm interacting pretty much with white kids. So I'm a freshman in high school, and they are really like less. My high school graduating class had like 750 kids. Maybe 20 or 25 were black in the class. So the ethnic makeup of the high school are largely Italians and Irish, because it's a Catholic school, not many Jewish kids. So I'm dealing with a lot of Italian kids, a lot of Irish kids. The ones who stick out the most to me are the Italian kids. Now, for those who don't know, one of the towns that populated my high school, where many of the Italian students came from, is a town where I mentioned the name. You may have heard of it before. I'm sure it rings a bell. The name of the town was Howard Beach.
Ooh.
Yes. Several of my classmates in my high school were from Howard Beach is in Queens, who were from Howard Beach. You talk about John Gotti? My brother went to St. Francis Prep 5 years after me and graduated with John Gotti's son.
Whoa.
My high school literally had kids who had parents that were connected. I remember being in high school and there were kids who were running illegal gambling rackets in high school with like the point spreads. and kids would gamble. And if you couldn't get paid up, you didn't pay them,
Lumped.
you get tuned up.
Mm.
You get like tuned up for real, for real. As a matter of fact, my best friend in high school, my friend James, made the mistake, I think, betting on some football games with one of these kids, and it was time to pay up. And I remember we were in the hallway, and they were trying to tune my man up, and we basically I had to protect my boy, or it was going to get ugly. And eventually, I think the teacher broke it up before it got bad, but it could have got rough.
We just had dice games.
Now there were no dice games. We didn't have dice games.
We just had dice games. That's all you have in California is dice games. We didn't have a whole mafia fucking handing out football cards on Friday at school with the spreads on them and shit. That is a complex high school. You went to Mafia High over there.
Yeah, it was.
I see why when you hear the Italian accent, you get triggered.
Yeah, it was no joke. You know, it was. I mean, and the racial tension was very, very high. I mean, the thing is though, like most schools, the school was kind of segregated. So the few black kids we had sat amongst themselves, and the Latinos sat amongst themselves, and the Latinos and the blacks were close to each other. But I developed a friendship with three guys who would become my best friends in high school, and we were, we weren't the cool kids. We were kind of nerdy. I'm not gonna lie about that. But we really kind of went our own way because we realized that the four of us had our own kind of idyllic kind of way about ourselves, and we had a good time, and we enjoyed the school. But one of the things that was very, very difficult was that the school really didn't do much to nurture like any understanding of racial identity, right? So there was no black history. There was no like understanding of the civil rights movement. I didn't learn any of that stuff in this school. And not only that, basically, like, there was a lot of real serious racism. I remember my senior year in high school. One of my classmates, who was also a Haitian kid, all the Haitian kids took French in high school. We were in French class. I'm not going to mention this guy's name, but he actually is a very well-known executive in the rap industry. I'm not going to mention the label, but we were in a French class together, and the teacher was asking questions about who knows this answer, and he asked my classmate, and my classmate got the answer wrong. He was like, "God damn, man, you freaking spear chucker." I was like, "What the fuck? Did you just call?" I was fuming. Call a kid a spear chucker in the middle of the class. Kid, I also happened to be a football player.
Oh.
And
was it like that scene in Fast Times at Ridgemont High where Forrest Whitaker went off?
I mean, listen, man, I definitely wanted to go off, but this was not the kind of environment where you were going to be going off on the teacher who was the favorite Italian American teacher of all the football players. So that was kind of the reality then. But I'm in that high school, and I'm witnessing. We would hang out. Sometimes we would take time off. We go hang out in New York City. And one of the things that I remember vividly.
When you say New York City, you mean Manhattan.
Manhattan. You got to remember, like, for the kids who are the outer borough kids, when you say I want to go hang out in the city, we're going to go hang out in Manhattan. So sometimes we were after school, we would go to Manhattan. We take the subway, we go into Manhattan, we'd hang out, we go to different parts of the city. And, that was kind of the things that we did. We talked about where we wanted to go to college, and it was just the city started to clean up itself. But the racial tension of the Koch administration was something that was very ever present in the city. I remember literally watching, and one of the things that I enjoyed the most in terms of where you really got a sense of like black historical consciousness in this abyss of this Catholic high school was watching Gil Noble's Like It Is. Like It Is was the Black Affairs TV show that we had in New York City. As we did in our show, we talked about Who Speaks for Black People, Jason. We talked about how after the urban rebellions and the riots in the 60s, the government basically says that one of the things we have to do is start giving black voices in media. So there's a plethora of all these Black Affairs TV shows that start to develop. So you have Black Journal with Tony Brown, and you have Like It Is. So I remember watching Like It Is with Gil Noble. You had Tony Brown's Journal with Tony Brown, America's Black Forum, and I was very much into these shows, even in the 70s and in high school. Because I was like, yeah, okay, great. We're gonna get some like black culture and some black news, whatever. Because my father was very, very much a race man. He was very pro-black, so it was a very it was a good way to really get a sense of kind of cultural awareness. And one of the things about New York City is that New York City, there's a strong sense of black nationalism because Harlem is in New York. So even though I wasn't getting imbued with any kind of actual history about black history in high school, I definitely had a sense of like a very healthy kind of pro-black identity. I was never ashamed of my race because I grew up in a very healthy black neighborhood. And even though I had to deal with this crap at my high school, it was just something we had to do. So I remember vividly when the news of Eleanor Bumpurs, who was killed, I believe, by a police officer in New York City. I remember
And why was she killed?
Say again?
And why was she killed?
Well, I think I forgot what was the story behind Eleanor Bumpurs.
I believe they were serving an eviction notice, and she was being a little difficult, but she didn't have a gun. She was like 80 years old.
Right. So I vividly remember that. Bernard Getz was something that was really a point of contention because I remember being
Bernard Getz a little bit because I think a lot of people don't know the whole Bernard Getz.
Bernard Getz was a white guy who was on a subway in New York City who claimed that a couple of black kids were trying to rob him or accost him, and he had a gun, and he shot one of the black kids, and then there was another one who I think was either running or trying to evade him, and he said, hey, you want another one? And he, bam, he took it and he killed him. I believe Getz was acquitted.
He said, and I quote, "You look fine, here, have another."
Right.
That young man has brain damage to this day and is paralyzed.
Correct. Bernard Getz was a major point of contention for me when I was in high school because I remember kids in my high school who were saying, "Free Bernie Getz." Bernie Getz was right. I mean, it was a big thing where you really felt kids were like, yeah, Bernie Getz was the man. He didn't do anything wrong. That was like the real first.
But would you say there was a racial split at first? Because there's before they knew who he was when he's still the subway vigilante, who ultimately the only reason why we know his name is because he turned himself in. They were never going to find him. Do you think that there was a racial divide? Or do you think that a lot of people in New York, because I mean, let's set the tone and give some context. There was no transit police at the time. All you had at best were the Guardian Angels.
Curtis Sleeve and the Guardian Angels, I remember them too.
Who were a multiracial coalition of vigilantes at best. So there was fear. I believe New York City might have been the murder capital of the country during this era as well.
There was a lot of crime in New York.
And Bernard Getz claims that he was robbed and beat up. And in his confession, he admits that after being robbed and beat up, that he never wanted to feel that way again because it wasn't the robbery, it was the beating up part. He felt he was emasculated by the ass kicking. Said he was thrown through a plate glass door.
Well, I can tell you right now, that's not the way Bernie Getz was resonating in the consciousness of the black community of New York City at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Bernie Getz was resonating as some white boy who murdered or
He didn't
tried
want
to murder some young black kids. And in the context of the kind of racial hostility that black folk had experienced in New York City, in neighborhoods and by the cops, no one is exactly trying to hear his particular rationale. So Bernie Getz was a point of contention as well. Now, the Howard Beach incident. Now, I graduated high school in 1986. I believe Howard Beach was the year right after I graduated. What year was the Howard Beach incident? I remember that.
Howard Beach was 86.
Was it 86 or last year?
I believe it was
Okay,
86.
so
Am I right? Let me look it up. And
I'm not-
Eleanor Bumpers was being served an eviction notice.
Howard Beach incident was in December 1986. Now,
Woo! I'm on a roll. Time to go solo.
Howard Beach happens the day after my birthday, my freshman year of college. I graduated high school in 86, right? So I remember one of the most, first of all, I went to college at Hofstra University, was in Long Island, right? Now, most of the kids who go to Hofstra are from New York City or from New Jersey or the tri-state area, but they tended to be a different type of student than the students that I went to high school with. Yes, there was a majority white school, but they were not Italians, they were not Irish. They tended to be upper middle class kids from Long Island. There was a lot of them were Jewish as well. Or if they were white ethnics, they came from more Long Island upper middle class families and didn't have that same kind of like working class racial animus that you got as much when I was in high school at St. Francis, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I remember when the Howard Beach incident happens in my freshman year of college, and I'm watching the news broadcast of Howard Beach, and I'm watching this. They got images of the guys who committed the offense, and I'm seeing kids in Howard Beach defend the assailants. I'm watching literally. I'm like, this guy was in my graduating class. This guy was in my graduating class. I'm seeing all these kids who were defending the assailants who literally graduated with me from my high school.
Whoa. Whoa. Really?
Yes. As a kid, particularly, I'm not going to mention his name. Yes. Literally graduated from my high. And I'm watching this on TV. I'm like, I think I called my boy, one of my boys. I think I called my boy James, who went to high school with me. I was like, yo, you know who I saw on television with the Howard Beach thing? And I was like, who? I said, such and such from prep. And he was like, what? I was like, yeah, all of these kids that I went to high school with who were in my class were out there, defending. I mean, kids used to wear T-shirts with the names of the assailants. Talking about free. What was his name? Joey Farmer. What was the name of the kid who was Michael Griffith was the
Michael was the victim. Yeah.
but with the names of the assailants. And I remember seeing that, and I was just like, these. Now, the thing that really was my saving grace in college, and where my co-students are mostly kids from New York City as well, is that at Hofstra they had a higher educational opportunities program, which was designed to recruit inner city kids, people, minority kids, to Hofstra, and they had a summer program called the NOAA program, the New Opportunities at Hofstra. These higher educational opportunities programs usually come out of the civil rights movement. They were basically like an educational opportunity program for inner city kids to go to college. They were very common in New York City at the time, New York State at the time. The NOAA program was New Opportunities at Hofstra, where basically the kids would come out of the inner city and they would come to Hofstra for a summer, and they would be prepared. They would come before their freshman year, and they would be prepared to start college. I did not go through the NOAA program. My parents paid for my tuition. I was a regular student. The thing about the NOAA program is that it was run by a man named Frank Smith, who came out of the movement period of the 60s and the 70s, who was a very, very hardcore black nationalist. Hardcore. And we had the Upper Brown program as well, yes. And the NOAA program was like Black history intensity on 500. I mean, it was just like these cats came out like Harambe. I mean, it was like for real.
Lots of dashikis is what you're saying.
I mean, it's not. I mean, just like everything from the Black Panthers to like the Underground Railroad. I mean, these kids are getting like bombarded with like Black history. And the thing that I liked about, even though I didn't go through the program, is like a lot of my friends went to the NOAA program. I used to hang out in their offices, and I used to read the books that they were reading in the program. And this was how I really started to become like a Black history buff. Is basically as a result of interacting with kids who were in the NOAA program at Hofstra. NOAA, again, New Opportunities at Hofstra, who came through this summer program. So, I remember vividly there was a brother who was we're still friends on Facebook. He was older than me. He was a senior in college when I was a freshman. His name was Ronald Hart. His name is Tabari Zobani now. He's a Muslim cat. He's a teacher. Brilliant. This is a cat who really inspired me to read, because I have a piece that I wrote. Actually, I wrote it in the Huffington Post. And the title of the piece is What Happened to the Black Literary Canon? And
Terry McMillan.
What the piece is about is that when I was in college in the late 80s, basically it was cool to seem like you were one of the quote unquote conscious brothers. Say you didn't have to be like Mr. Hardcore Hotep, if you will. But basically, if you had, I just sent you the link, Jason.
Gotcha.
If you wanted to be considered like a brother who was serious, you had to like, okay, yeah, I read the African Origins of Civilization, Sheikh Anta Diop. I've read Fire Next Time, Before the Mayflower. But like there was this canon of books that you pretty much have had to have read, or you kind of, people will look at you kind of suspect, So, that's where I really kind of, if any of you have seen the movie Higher Learning, I mean, it's like a trope where they have, what's his name, the conscious dude.
What is higher? What is learning?
Who's been there for like 5 years. But, there were cats like that who were there, who were like very Black consciousness. And you got to remember also, this is a period of time, y'all see, I'm kind of sad about this, I'll be very honest. You guys see the hoteps we have today who are corny kids who are watching YouTube videos of guys who are kind of clowns who aren't even reading the books that they're talking about, right? When I was in college, not only did you have to read the books, I wasn't watching videos of John Henry Clark or Ivan Van Sertima. Every Black History Month, I would go and listen to John Henry Clark and Ivan Van Sertima at Hofstra because Frank Smith, who ran the NOAA program, knew all those guys. So literally, I probably had seen John Henry Clark, Van Sertima, Leonard Jeffries, Dr. Ben, all of the cats that these hoteps that you're talking about, all like, oh, he was amazing. I was like, I used to see these cats every year during Black History Month at Hofstra. I read them. I take pictures with them. I was like, it was a normal part of my college experience to be around that discourse. That's why when I look at these kids now and they're like, "Oh, this was so deep," I was like, "Man, been there, done that." I mean, it's like, come on, man. I think this is like I've been through that phase. That's why when I have a friend recently who's kind of she's an older sister, but she's newly getting into her cultural nationalism stuff, and she has a problem with my politics because I'm like, I explained to her why I don't do cultural nationalism, why I'm beyond Black nationalism, and she was like, "Oh, I don't understand. You just want to work with those white people, blah blah blah." And I was like, we got into major arguments. I said, "Listen, sis, I flushed that politics down the toilet 30 years ago. Like I was a hardcore nationalist. I was into all of that stuff. I've been, I was never into the ISIS papers, but I remember when the ISIS papers came out.
I read the ISIS papers in high school because they were like some people. We didn't have a Black student union at my high school. We had the Pan African Coalition, and I was given the ISIS papers. Like, you read this, and then you will see, brother.
But anyway,
I mean, I was 17. I mean,
so I was it. So what ends up happening, like my second semester, freshman year, I got very interested in pledging fraternity. And a lot of people were like, "Oh, Pascal, oh, you're so hard in your fraternity. Do you regret?" I said, I do not regret pledging my fraternity. It was one of the most transformative experiences that I had in my life. And people ask, "Well, how can you say that? Because you're so hard." I said, number one, I don't know too many experiences that you can provide for an 18-year-old kid from New York City who's a child of Caribbean immigrant parents, where after joining an organization, he's immediately connected to almost 100 years of Black history. I'll give you an example. I pledged Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity, which is the oldest intercollegiate Black fraternity, in the spring of 1987. As a matter of fact, this May will be my 35th anniversary in my fraternity. In the fall of 1987, we had a fraternity Founders Day. So I'm a young neophyte. Neophyte is a new initiate. I got my suit and my fraternity pin, and I'm going to this Founders Day, and they had it in a church, a very kind of solemn thing. So I walk into this event, and I'm like all excited because I'm like, when you're new in the fraternity, you're like, this is like the greatest thing since sliced bread. Mm-hmm. I walk in, and this old man, this guy's like 85 years old looking. He comes to me, he's like, "Hey, young brother, what's your name?" And he gives me a handshake and whatnot. I say, "Oh, Pascal Robert, Spring 87, I'm President Hofstra." I was like, "Hey, man, my name is Frederick Patterson, man. I pledged at Alpha Mu chapter 1920 something, man. Good to meet you, young brother." I was like, "Okay, nice to meet you, brother. All right, good." So they do the service, right? And after the service is over, someone gets up to the microphone and they said, "We'd like to recognize the brother we have here, brother Frederick Douglass Patterson, founder of the United Negro College Fund."
Jesus Christ.
That was the old man.
Wow. That's pretty impressive.
Pretty much from that point on, I was kind of sold. I actually hung out with Charlie Rangel in our fraternity house. I got into a political argument with Charlie Rangel at like 19 years old. So
what did you tell? Can you tell people who Charlie Rangel is?
Charlie Rangel is the long-term congressman from New York City,
who was a huge proponent of the 1994
mass incarceration. Yes.
What did you say about reparations?
Mass incarceration. I said mass incarceration.
Yeah. Huge proponent of it.
But what I'm trying to say is that one of the things that these organizations do is that people talk about the Black political class. I'm 18 years old and I'm basically hanging out with the Black political class at conventions having drinks. Watching these guys be like, "Damn, man, she got a fat ass." So I'm like, "Aren't you mayor of Detroit? Like, what's wrong with you?" So of course I'm very transparent of the class contradictions of these organizations, but my organic understanding to Black history and African American history and the African American historical continuum, what allows me to meet guys who pledged with Martin Luther King, what allows me to meet guys who were leaders of the civil rights movement or guys who are in SNCC, is being affiliated with this organization, which is basically the training ground of the Black political class. Now I'm not saying this to like big these organizations up, but what I'm saying is that for me personally, it was a valuable connection to learning the internal workings of what exactly Black political and social life was at a very high level. Now the thing is though, being in these organizations sells you a narrative of Black history. And the narrative that it sells you was that, yes, the civil rights movement we led, Dr. Martin Luther King was an alpha, Thurgood Marshall was an alpha, Du Bois, and the talented 10th, that we've led Black America through the 20th century and we can lead them to the 21st. So you get the Black liberal elite narrative of we uplift. You get the petite bourgeois Black nationalist propaganda of we are the leaders of the race, and you're infused with that stuff. You look at these guys as heroes. You buy into the vindicationist posture. You drink all of that. You drink all of that Kool-Aid.
Well, before you drink any more Kool-Aid, we've gone on for an hour, and for the next hour, we're going to do a call-in show for the Patreon champagne room. So if you are a patron, the link is already up. Junior is taking calls. So we're ready for your calls. If you're not a patron, patreon.com/Bitter Lake Presents. And before we go, I'll give you guys 53 seconds. If you can name the band behind me and you live in the continental US, I will send you an Anglo-Pessimism shirt. I'll go into my own pocket because we don't get them for free. And I will have one mailed to you if you can guess this band behind me. No one is even close. There was one, the Dillinger Escape Plan was kind of close. People are asking Pascal to drop Jerry Curl picks.
I never had a Jerry Curl.
Yes, sounds the same elsewhere. I will, you know what? Any t-shirt on the website, I will send if you can guess this band behind me. And you have 30. I'm giving you guys an extra 30 seconds. Someone says Hootie and the Owlfish. Now you're just naming crazy names that aren't real. It's not the Cro-Mags. I'll give you one last hint. They are from Georgia. No one's got it. Nirvana 2. Show you more of the pick. I don't even know how. Here, I guess I can just walk away.
So I hope this show was somewhat interesting. I feel like I bored the hell out of you guys for an hour.
No, people said they liked it. Here you go. There's the pick. There's the pick. I walked out. Big Rich. Zach Brown Band. It's not a boy band. They're not from Athens. It's not Cattle Decapitation. They're from San Diego. Oh God, I wish I could play their music right now, and then you still wouldn't get it, but you might be closer. These guesses are pretty funny. Fever 333. Your boy used to tech for Let Live. Then you should know who this band is because the guitar player plays with that Fever 333 band. And I've gone longer than I thought I was going to go. Arrested Development. I met them on Yo Gabba tour. Arrested Development was one of our musical guests for Atlanta. Someone's asking, is Anglo-pessimism just a joke or is it a real thing? It is a joke,
But you
but
can make it a real thing.
someone tagged us on Twitter. They said, "Oh no, like Anglo-pessimism is about to get real," because there was an article, I think, in the New York Times about something called hetero-pessimism. Did you see that tag, Pascal?
No, what is that? Like depressed small dick having men? What is that about?
Devoid Reality got it. Devoid Reality got it. It is The Chariot is the band behind me. So I have to send you a shirt. So hit me up with your address and I will send you a shirt. DM me on Twitter or Facebook and I will get on that. It is The Chariot is the band behind me and they broke up in 2013. Damn it. I was hoping I could go the whole show and no one would have got it. But yes, Steve coined Anglo-pessimism and Andy made the shirt and the Cobra family put it up on the website as they do. But we are working on finally a Pascal Mau Mau shirt. So yeah, we're gonna use the cartoon picture of you, the image that Djene has. He made for the Patreon. We're gonna make that into a shirt. So I'm excited for that. Hopefully we'll have that up in a week or so. Someone says Pascal Garvey hat. That's pretty funny.
There you go.
Ever since Adolf called it a Captain Crunch hat. That was pretty funny. So we will see you guys in the after hours. Call in. Let's have your takes about New York. We got to have some deep dive conversations about Yusef Hawkins. We got to have some deep dive conversations about racial tensions. We have to have a deep dive conversation about the transition from Koch to Dinkins. From Dinkins to Cuomo, right?
No, Giuliani.
Giuliani. Oh, sorry. Oh, how could I forget Giuliani? And then we must talk about the Giuliani years.
Damn, we got all that talking to do, man.
Well, people can call in. So on that note, we are out.